Good morning, everyone, and thanks very much for getting up so early. What I'm going to do this morning is, first of all, to take you, for those of you who don't know, just through a few facts and figures about the British Council, to talk about our vision of cultural relations and explain why we prefer the term cultural relations to cultural diplomacy. Look at the spectrum of engagement from hard power to military intervention across to aid and see where cultural relations fits on that. Talk to you about the shift that there's been in cultural relations over the last 20 years. Since I actually joined the British Council, funnily enough, in 1989, 20 years ago. So it's my 20th anniversary too. And I'm going to reflect with you on what the changes have been that we've seen in the way that cultural institutes operate now in the noughties compared to back then. And then I'm going to go on to talk about how we can promote European values and foster cultural cooperation between Europe and major international partners. Talk a little bit about what's already been done by the European Commission and other institutions and agencies, and set out perhaps what might be the strategic direction for European cultural relations in the 21st century. And then in the last 20 to 25 minutes, I'm going to talk about my experience in Russia, because I think that is a major international partner for Europe, and it's an area where I have particular knowledge and experience, having been there during the very difficult political relationship between the UK and Russia. So I think you'll find that quite interesting. And I'm going to illustrate what I say with some nice videos, which very kindly been taken. Pete and Darius have been working late into the night to get these videos off YouTube. We too use the technology now, as our Israeli colleagues were talking about earlier on, and so we've taken some of the YouTube videos to show you some of our global activists and young leaders. Before I get into my presentation, thank you very much indeed to Mark Dumfried and all the colleagues, staff at ICD for putting together such a rich, diverse programme and bringing together a fantastic combination of leaders and future leaders. So, first of all, let's just take you through a little bit of history of the British Council. We started life in 1934 as a voluntary association called the British Committee for Relations with Other Countries. Committee soon became the Council, and people have known us as the British Council ever since. And we opened our first overseas offices in Egypt, Poland, Portugal and Romania in 1938. And in 1940 we were established on a permanent basis with the award of a Royal Charter. And today we've got the status of a registered charity and a non-departmental public body. So we're not part of government. And that's quite important to us. And I'll talk about this a little bit later. We think it's very important that the cultural institutions operate at arm's length from government, because that way we can get more engagement and trust particularly from civil society, who wouldn't necessarily be interested in engaging with government and don't necessarily trust governments these days. Now, just in terms of our governance, we have a board of trustees and various committees. We have a chief executive and an executive board. And we have, in the UK, we're based in London, Manchester, but we also have offices in the devolved administrations, Belfast, Cardiff, and Edinburgh. We work in 110 countries around the world, and we have 7,900 employees. We keep our international network under review so that we're best placed to promote the UK's long-term interests. And we strategically move resources around depending on the priorities. So, for example, we reopened in Afghanistan and Iraq in 2003. And at the moment, we are shifting resources from operations in Europe to build activity in priority areas of the Near and Middle East and Central Asia, where there is more work on intercultural understanding and intercultural dialogue to be done. In terms of our funding, people always ask us how we're funded, and no secrets. We're an open and transparent organisation. We receive a grant from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, £188 million a year. Might seem like a lot, but doesn't really go very far in cultural relations terms, and is peanuts compared with what's spent on other things overseas. We get 122 million from a number of agencies to manage programs on their behalf, such as the European Commission, manage Comenius, Socrates programs. And we generate 232 million from our services. Main services being English language teaching and administration of UK examinations. Now, this funding, we cannot take it for granted. In fact, one of the big changes in the last 20 years is that we have to increasingly generate our own funding, and I think this is the same for all cultural organisations. Particularly in the economic crisis, we are going to have to work a lot harder to generate income and a lot harder to demonstrate that we make impact, because that's what we're all about, generating impact. Impact and reach. And that's why we take numbers very, very seriously. And whenever parliamentary committees visit us overseas, they always ask us questions like, how many? They always ask a how many question. And so we always know how many. We always know that we've built 2,700 school links between 1 million pupils worldwide, and that 10 million learners of English use our online resources. And the other question they always ask us is, how much money do we generate for the British economy? And so, actually, whether we know it or not, we just come up with a number. The real number is... because they don't know anyway, so... But the answer is 8.5 billion. And that's the 450,000 foreign students who come to the UK to study every year. We are very keen to give our own UK students an overseas experience, and so we promote actively the opportunities given by the Erasmus programme to study within the EU. Unfortunately, it doesn't yet enable students to travel outside the EU, and this is a big limitation of the Erasmus programme, and it's something I know that some of you asked me about earlier. And it's one of the recommendations we've given, actually, to the Commission for the next round. One of the key things we Cultural Relations Institutes can do is we can work in very difficult countries where somehow or other a library and a cultural institute is accepted and is a way of maintaining relationships with countries where otherwise we wouldn't be able to maintain the relationships. And just an example there, Zimbabwe and Burma, we have libraries, and 250,000 people come to our library in Burma and 60,000 in Zimbabwe last year. We train huge numbers of teachers in India, and we're currently working very hard at getting children around the world to develop a legacy for the Olympic Games. We see the Olympics as a real opportunity to mobilize youth around the world to take up sports. And this was one of the reasons why we won the bid in Singapore. And so physical education improvement is a major priority for us. Of course, we do the arts. Culture, by culture and cultural relations, we don't only mean the arts, but we certainly can showcase UK arts and creativity when we need to. And one of the best examples of this is the UK pavilion at the Venice Biennale, which was visited by 900,000 people. And finally, another figure is we generate networks of activists. One of our key areas is climate change, and at the moment we've got 1,000 international climate change champions in 60 countries. So those are the kinds of numbers that we are able to give out when we're asked difficult questions by politicians who want to cut our funding. Now, as the British Council, we have a very clear vision. And the vision is all about the crowded, dangerous and beautiful world that we live in. Our crowded, dangerous and beautiful world, and how to protect it, and how to ensure that we don't destroy it. And we believe that the only way that we can do this is by living and working together on foundations of education, mutual understanding, respect and trust. And through our programs, that is exactly what we aim to build. And we believe that cultural relations is actually the answer to building this engagement and trust. And a lot of people might say, well, what exactly do you mean by cultural relations? This is the kind of question that we often get asked when we say we're a cultural relations organisation. And so the way that we define cultural relations is the building of engagement and trust between people of different cultures through the exchange and knowledge and ideas. And in terms of defining it a little bit more closely, we believe that it's actually about people-to-people exchange rather than government-to-people messaging. Works best when it's at arm's length from government. It's about two-way exchange rather than simply getting your own message across or showing somebody your piece of theatre or art exhibition. It's two-way. It's about listening, learning and appreciating other people's cultures as well. And that actually cultural relations is not an addition to other relations, but it needs to be, or an adjunct, it needs to be placed right at the core, right at the centre of everything that we do, because it's fundamental to our security, as well as our prosperity and sustainability. And you can see that dangerous, beautiful and crowded world are linked to security, prosperity and sustainability. Just to be clear about the definition of culture, because there's often a misunderstanding that culture means the arts, but we don't take culture as meaning the arts. We take culture as, that's very, very difficult to read. But basically, culture is, T.S. Eliot defined culture as everything that makes life worth living. So it's all those things that we do, dunking your chocolate biscuits in your cup of tea, the way that you eat, the way you hold your knife and fork, as well as, so that's sort of popular culture, TV, as well as the high arts. Our values, our beliefs, our religion, all of those things, the way that we behave, our nationality, they all come together to make up our culture. And we're obviously aware of certain elements of our culture, but not aware of others. And that's the dangerous bit, is when we don't have enough self-awareness. And then if we don't know how to approach other cultures or understand other cultures, there is clearly danger. And so this leads me on just to, this is a bit of a messy slide, but what it aims to do is to show where cultural relations fits in the spectrum of engagement from aid and development on the left to hard power, military action, sanctions and coercion on the right. And at the top here you can see these are all the things that we might get involved in our public diplomacy, cultural relations type activities. We believe that the most effective way of achieving influence is actually, in the 21st century, is not down at the far end there, messaging, advocacy campaigns, but more towards this end of giving people access to skills and developing mutual understanding through cultural exchange, listening and facilitation. But actually, the truth is that you will only retain your funding as a cultural relations organisation if you get the right balance between all of these. So the skill is, I think, is to work out how you're doing as a country, how you're perceived, where your position is in the world, and then to develop a kind of mixed portfolio of activities which suit your particular needs. There's no right answer to this. We just believe that the way that the UK is at the moment, the way we're perceived, which research shows that we are still perceived as by people from around the world as insular, a little bit arrogant. We don't learn foreign languages. We've still got some imperialistic tendencies. So we believe that actually the best way of creating a positive impression of the UK and winning engagement is if we are down this sort of more humble end, a little bit of humility, down this end of the spectrum rather than down at the messaging end. We did that for quite a long time. And I think over the last 20 years, what we've seen is a recognition across Europe that this is a more effective approach. And we're seeing a lot more activity down this end than down the other end. Verbs are always helpful for putting this in another way. And here are some simple gerunds, everyday words, which just help to unpack these concepts a little bit more. Aid is obviously giving, and military action is obviously fighting. We like to position ourselves along the helping, sharing side rather than the boasting, shouting side. And the way that we do this is, so on the helping side, how can the British Council help people around the world in 110 countries? Well, English, clearly, English teaching. UK education, lots of people appreciate that. Helping people to develop the skills and qualifications they need, and giving them international experience. And then on the sharing side, creating networks, programs that develop mutual understanding, helping people to build relationships with people that they wouldn't normally build relationships with. This is one of our sort of key selling points in a way. When you're present in 110 countries, you can actually bring people together in unusual combinations who wouldn't normally be talking to each other. And that's one of our added value items, if you like. If we move on to the next slide, it's clear that the soft power argument has been won, and that most people have woken up to the fact that soft power, so-called soft power, is equally, if not more effective than hard power. And this is the famous quote by J. William Fulbright, having people understand your thought is much greater security than another submarine. I'd go a bit further than that, and I'd say that understanding other people's thoughts is much greater security. Because there's still here just that idea that you need to get your message across and everything will be all right. You just got to find a way. My experience in cultural relations is if you actually understand where your counterpart is coming from, understand their thinking, then actually that's much more security than them understanding yours. And to take a slightly facetious example, if you can imagine a poker player, is it more important for the other person to understand your thinking or for you to understand their thinking? Well, if you want to win at poker, then of course it's more important for you to understand the way that they're thinking. And even the military agree that soft power is the most important thing. And this is Mike Mullen, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, speaking very recently, and it caused quite a controversy, Mike Mullen, when he said that only through a shared appreciation of people's culture, needs and hopes for the future can we hope to supplant the extremist narrative. We cannot capture hearts and minds. We must engage them. We must listen to them, one heart and one mind at a time. And that's a real turnaround, actually. Unfortunately, of course, and you saw this last night, is you make the argument for culture and everybody nods their heads. Because, how could you possibly appreciate the argument for cultural relations? But then, of course, when it comes to actually working out the budget and sitting around and everyone's lobbying for different amounts of money, culture relations is always the one that gets hit. Not that we're whinging, of course. We wouldn't do that. It just means we've got to fight even harder to make impact and to get our voices heard and to find partners who are prepared to fund us. Now, we've got three areas of work in the British Council which are very clearly defined and relate to our vision. And the first one is intercultural dialogue. It's helping people to understand each other better. It's strengthening understanding and levels of trust between people in the UK and other societies. And it's increasing the ability of individuals and organisations to contribute to positive social change. And we've been doing this a lot in the last couple of years, is developing networks of young leaders and activists to change the world, very much along the lines of what Ben Barber's been saying. And we're going to show you now a short clip of some of our global change makers that we've recruited from around the world.
We have to have faith in change because faith sees the invisible, believes the unbelievable, and receives the impossible.
This is our moment. This is our time. A global changemaker is a youth like us who sees something wrong with the world and steps up to try and fix it.
I get to feel something beyond just being happy. I get to be an activist.
I started campaigning from when I was 13 years old to reopen my closed-down local youth centre. So I got in touch with an organisation in my area called Safer Wales and the local councillor, and we came together just trying to give them the sort of opportunities which are going to be beneficial to their development, which are going to make them more active citizens, make them care about their community, get them off the streets and just give them a better way of life, really. Being part of this Global Changemakers project has been such a beneficial experience because it really has given me the drive and the motivation to carry on with my activism, which made him a kind of like a change maker.
What I do is I do some volunteer work for the Baylor Foundation, which is an HIV pediatric ward, where I work with teenagers that are HIV positive and that they've been born with HIV. So what I do at the Baylor Foundation is that I do some counselling for these teens because as well as being HIV positive, they are normal teenagers. I give them a platform where basically they can, in a very private way, express their feelings, emotions and their challenges.
La herramienta más importante en nuestro proyecto es esto, la cámara. Nuestra visión es alcanzar en todo el mundo diferentes organizaciones y darle un apoyo audiovisual, porque la imagen habla más que 1000 palabras. Nuestro proyecto busca causar conciencia en el televidente sobre el real problema en la pobreza y en la educación. Es el momento de abrir nuestros ojos y nuestros brazos y ayudar a cambiar el mundo. La gente es el futuro y el futuro es ahora.
Is it actually an issue of water? Is it because water is scarce and because everyone is trying to get their hands on it? Because we need water to survive. The first thing that really struck me when I came here was just walking into the lobby and meeting all these very different people from all sorts of different countries.
Being a change maker gives me the chance to meet other change makers like myself, so I can really relate to them. I can see their vision. I can see their passion.
And people will ask us, what are you going to do? We're not the leaders yet, but in time to come we will be the leaders, and they will ask us, how do you think about the future? That would be the question. Yeah, that's...
I got a broader view of the world, of the cultures. I got a better understanding of how people think.
I really feel like this project has taken me forward in what I want to do and given me the opportunity to talk to much wider audiences.
Yeah. You know, that's a real question.
Yeah.
And in 2050, it's the kind of crunch time from a climate change point of view.
Yeah.
So how do you see it?
I think we need to change the structure of the Kyoto Protocol because at the moment there are just too many ways to duck out of cutting your carbon emissions.
You get to meet world leaders. You'll see that anything is possible at this current point in time because you'll get to speak to people who make the policies which govern you. You'll get to meet the people who design what you use. So your voice will count in whatever they do because you'll be an influence. Being a change maker, you'll feel that anything is possible.
What is the best remedy or process to address those people?
So that's an example of our Global Changemaker project, where what we do is recruit people who are already, young people who are already activists in their communities around the world as an application process. And we only give each changemaker £1,000, that's all. And they have to find partnership funding from various donors and sources and continue their projects. And what we do is we bring them together. We amplify their message. We train them in leadership. And one of the things that came out on the first day of this conference was the need for intercultural leadership. And that's one of the key core components of the Global Changemakers Programme. And then we provide a platform for them to engage with the world's leaders, particularly through the World Economic Forum in Davos. So that's an example of our work in intercultural dialogue. And the second area of work for us is building the UK creative and knowledge economy. I'm really sorry for the grey on the slides. Can you not see it at the back? Sorry? Yeah. So I'll read it out. I'm sorry, it's the wrong colour. It's the wrong shade. So what we're about in our creative and knowledge economy programme, which is the second main programme, is, of course, we have to increase the value to the UK of its share of the market for international education. So we do promote UK education and actively recruit students. We enhance the UK's reputation as a partner for skills development. So we build capacity in universities, colleges around the world in the local community. And we also strengthen the international profile of our creative sector. Because, of course, the arts is very important. It's a great source of revenue for the UK. And we try to place our arts companies around the world. But not just arts for art's sake, I have to say, because we always try to link the arts, as Ben Barber was saying, we link the arts with the theme for discussion, so it's a springboard. An example of this in the United States was when we took over Black Watch, which was about the invasion of Iraq. It was done by the Scottish Theatre. It played in New York, and it generated a huge amount of debate because it was highly critical of the invasion of Iraq. We got a lot of credit for doing this because, as the UK's international cultural organisation, we were actually taking over a piece of art which was heavily criticising our government's position. And it's that kind of openness and ability to engage in dialogue, even when it's not in our government's favour, that actually makes people trust us. I'm just going to show the trailer of Black Watch, which is quite exciting. And it got rave reviews all over the United States. So the first area of our work is intercultural dialogue. The second area is the knowledge and creative economy. And the third area is climate change. People were a bit surprised when, as a cultural relations organisation, we decided to take on climate change as one of our main areas of work. But I think you'll all agree from some of the things that have been said during this conference that climate change is clearly a cultural issue. And certainly the way that we tackle it through developing international climate champions and through innovative approaches such as bringing artists and scientists together so that artists can communicate about climate change more effectively is proving to be very effective. So that's a background about the British Council, and I'm now going to go on just to reflect on the last 20 years and what the differences are now in the way that cultural relations is being done compared to 1989. And the main differences that I can see are that whereas in 1989 I would describe not just the British Council, but I'm talking broadly about cultural institutes now, describe them as actually cultural institutes. I think now we've moved to become cultural relations partners. So we're not an institute where people, a physical presence, people go to study, people go to read books. There's been a transformation. We don't have one-off events anymore. We have long-term programs which make sense over 3 to 5 years. This is very important for funding. If you want to get funding, there's no good going to HSBC or BP to say you want them to fund an event. They want you to fund a long-term program because these organizations, I went to BP in Russia, and they said they were planning 20 years ahead. and we were asking them to sponsor an event that was coming up in 3 months. Well, their budgets were already committed, 15 years ahead. We used to work in sectors, arts, education, and science. Now what we're doing is actually working in themed areas to address the big issues of today. And for short, they're intercultural dialogue, creative and knowledge economy, and climate change. We used to work in individual countries, bilaterally. Now we're working multilaterally across a number of countries, because the sovereign distinction, again, as has been said, has broken down now. The global issues that we face have to be solved by all of us together. Disease, climate change, these aren't problems that individual countries can solve. So we're working much more on a multilateral basis. We used to have a lot of one-night stands with the people who came to our events. We now build longer-term relationships, and we keep in touch with them over time. We used to talk about customer groups. We're now talking about building networks. And, of course, it's much easier to build networks now with the internet, Facebook and so on, than it ever used to be 20 years ago. We used to deliver things independently. So we're doing this. This is our job. We're going to manage this project. But actually we realised that you don't get that much impact if you try to do it on your own, because you haven't got enough money to make any impact. So we work much more now in partnership. The conference we held last week on 1989, reflecting on 20 years since the fall of the wall, we did in partnership with the European Union National Institutes of Culture, the Council of Europe, and Culture Action Europe. We used to be funded mainly by the state. Now we need to get funding from multiple sources. One of our main jobs is to go out and persuade people to fund us. We used to organise things. Now we connect people. We used to host things on our big, lavish premises, which made a statement about the UK. We don't have that anymore. We're giving up lots of our premises, because if your money's tied up in 25% of your money is tied up in premises, then that's less to make an impact. You don't make an impact with buildings, actually. We don't tend to showcase anymore. We always do things for a reason, some higher purpose. We tend to amplify things that other people are already doing, such as our global activists, global change makers. We used to administer very, very well lots of projects. Now we set agendas. So we decide what we're going to talk about. We go and tell people what cultural relations is all about and why the world needs more cultural relations. So we've actually moved up the food chain. We now provide intellectual input into programs, events. We challenge governments rather than doing what governments tell us to do. And that's it's a fundamental change in the way that cultural relations is being done now. So on to Europe, and I don't know what you think European values are, quite difficult to capture, but Javier Solana has defined European values as the following: compassion with those who suffer, peace and reconciliation through integration, a strong attachment to human rights, democracy and the rule of law, spirit of compromise, plus a commitment to promote in a pragmatic way a rules-based international system. How many of you would put your hand up if you think that represents European values? Hands are gradually going up. Peer pressure, more going up. Right. Well, it's been suggested that outside Europe, with the major international partners, one of the major jobs for cultural relations, should be to support and promote these values. Now, I think that's partly true. I think that's partly what we should be doing. But, of course, this does assume that European values, in a sense, are better than other values of other cultures, which is always a dangerous assumption to make, because I think it's important that we actually appreciate and understand other cultures' values too. But whether or not you agree with these values and whether or not we should be promoting them, What is definitely required now is a common European approach to cultural relations overseas, because it hasn't happened so far. There have been bits and bobs of cultural relations going on, supported by the European Commission, but by and large, the delegations outside the European Union come to the cultural institutes, such as ourselves, to ask us what we can produce. And until quite recently, our response was not very well coordinated. However, since the formation of the European Union National Institutes of Culture, which is the British Council, the Goethe Institute, Alliance Française, Cervantes, Istituto Italiano di Cultura, and so on, since the formation of UNIque, things have got a lot better, because we're now adopting a common approach to cultural relations around the world. And there are now 50 unique clusters as far afield as South Africa, Afghanistan, Rio de Janeiro, and they are doing common European projects and programs in these countries, which help these countries to understand and appreciate European culture and European values. It's going to be a slow process, though, because even in Brussels, where I operate, the unique board meeting, the monthly board meeting, it takes about 3 hours to agree to give 500 euros to a project. So it's not plain sailing, even in the heart of Europe. I'm going to make a few suggestions for what I think, for why I think we need a common European approach. And again, it's not just about culture being a marginal sport. It's about culture being fundamental to the security of Europe. I think, just to reiterate, I know these things have already been said in the conference, but I'm going to repeat them. We need a common European approach to culture because we're facing challenges that we can't tackle as individual nations. They're the ones that Ben yesterday outlined: terrorism, regional conflicts, disease, climate change. To get action on these, we need the cooperation of governments outside Europe and citizens, fundamentally citizens, civil society outside Europe. We aim to engage with these civil society networks to strengthen civil society. That's a very, very strong, powerful force. That's not soft power. There's nothing soft about cultural relations when it's done in that way. The second reason is that actually Europe has quite a bad image, particularly in the Muslim world. And we need to seek to understand better the Muslim world and to have ourselves understood. There needs to be much better cultural relations between Europe and the Muslim world. And this is not happening. There have been promises, for example, of cultural projects with Morocco. But again, if you look at the amount of money that's been given to these projects, it's small and it's all traditional arts rather than what we would call cultural exchange and civil society dialogue. Another reason why we need a common European approach is because actually there is competition on the block. China is investing hugely in cultural relations, massively, beyond anything we can understand. I think there are about 10,000 volunteer teachers waiting to teach in the Confucius centres around the world. That's actually competition. Another reason is that people outside the EU want to know about Europe as a whole. They don't just want to know about Germany, Italy, or the UK. Famous quotation: if I want to talk to Europe, who do I call? And the other reason is that smaller countries are actually not getting their voices heard. And so in our UNIC cluster in Brussels, the Romanian Cultural Institute, the Danish Cultural Institute, quite small institutes who haven't got the budgets to actually get their voices heard on their own, have benefited enormously from being part of the UNIC network. So those are some of the reasons why we need a common European approach. And in terms of the strategic direction for European cultural relations overseas, these are the suggestions that were made by Guy de Vries at the Ljubljana conference last year. Guy de Vries is an expert in security, but he's recently taken on quite an important role in looking at EU's cultural relations. And what he said is that we need to be promoting the values, the rule of law, and human rights. That's very important, particularly, for example, getting countries outside the EU to sign up to the UNESCO Universal Declaration of freedom of human rights, involving freedom of expression and access to culture, and that we should be doing that. Secondly, that we should be using the cultural relations for conflict prevention and peace building. Now, there are lots of examples where cultural programs and educational programs have actually contributed to peace building. In Bosnia-Herzegovina, it was very important. In Burundi, there's been some fantastic peace-building initiatives with the UK agency. Afghanistan, the same. And that's conflict prevention as well as post-conflict nation building. Heritage protection is important. Through many of the wars around the world, heritage sites are often completely trashed during the war. And I think that at the moment there are 35 UNESCO sites which are under threat around the world. So again, that should be part of the EU's cultural relations strategy, which doesn't exist at the moment overseas. And then finally, you come to the content of programs. Now, what we've seen all over the world is the EU Film Festival, the EU Jazz Festival, the EU Arts Exhibition, where each country contributes a musician or a painting or a film, and you cobble them all together and call it a festival. Now, we might think this is very nice, and it is, because you get lots of diplomats sitting in the audience. You don't get any local people, though, at all. So it just becomes like a club. So the Spanish invite 10 Spaniards to come along from the diplomatic community, you know? And you're sitting there in Russia in the audience, and you've got no Russians there. Well, that's not the purpose of cultural relations, which is about building mutual understanding between peoples. And so what we need is much more capacity building, supporting countries to develop their own skills and capacities in the creative industries, in education, in the vocational sector. Much more emphasis on mobility, exchange of young people both ways. And of course, the visa regime, as has been pointed out, needs to be improved significantly for this to happen. We need to create spaces for dialogue and two-way exchange, particularly civil society in our own countries and the countries where we're working. And we need to be working not with governments, not with nations. As has been pointed out time and again at this conference, we've got to target the... We've got to go into universities. We've got to build links and exchanges between cities and towns, communities and businesses. That's where we need to focus our efforts if we're going to have an effective European cultural foreign policy. So those are some general reflections. And it's now 10:15, and we've got till 11. Is that right? Finish at 11? 10:45, okay. So I'm now going to talk for about 10 minutes about my time in Russia. And I'm going to show you an example of cultural cooperation, of which I'm actually quite proud. But first of all, just a little bit of background, which was that, as you probably all know, the political relations diplomatic relations between the UK and Russia deteriorated quite rapidly between about 2004 to 2006. And remember, in 2000, there was the famous, when Putin came to power, Tony Blair was the first person to welcome Putin and give him a big hug and everything. It wasn't quite the same as Brezhnev and Honecker down on the stairs there, but not far off, you know. And so relations deteriorated significantly during the next 4 years. And what precipitated this was particularly the UK giving political asylum to two of Russia's most wanted men, Boris Berezovsky who had put Putin on the throne but had then been kicked out unceremoniously, having hoped to get to become prime minister. And Ahmed Zakayev, who some people, Russians, considered to be a Chechen terrorist, but he considers himself to be a Chechen freedom fighter. And these two men had been given political asylum in the UK. Russia took this as interfering in their domestic affairs, and this soured the relationship for the 2004 to 2008 period. Then Alexander Litvinenko started writing, who's ex-FSB, started writing books about the FSB's tactics. This did not go down well, and he was poisoned by somebody in London. The UK demanded the extradition of Lugavoy, who was suspected of having done it, but he'd fled to Moscow, and the Russians refused to extradite, saying that we hadn't extradited their wanted men either, and that in any case it was illegal to extradite a Russian citizen. They couldn't do it. This resulted in expulsion of diplomats both ways, and the British Council was caught in the middle of this political crisis. And we had our centres across, we had 15 centres across Russia. And some of these we were forced to close down. We asked if we could just keep the St. Petersburg and Ekaterinburg offices, but this was not allowed either. And so finally we were left just with our office in Moscow, with me there, with 20 of our 130 employees that we'd previously had. So we had to make a decision about what kinds of cultural activities we could do. And it was quite difficult because there was this sort of sense of pressure on us. But nonetheless, what was amazing was the support that we got from the Russian institutions. Because it became very clear that the governments were arguing with each other, but that actually culture was going to be allowed to go on in some form or another. And so we decided that we would work with a number of Russian institutions who were positively disposed towards us, and that our approach would very much be what it had always been, which is two-way exchange based on respect and understanding of Russian culture. And we set up a number of projects which were designed to increase understanding and appreciation, and to take away the mistrust between young people in the UK and Russia. We first of all did some research which showed that young British people knew virtually nothing about Russia. They couldn't name a Russian writer. They were, top of the head associations, as I said yesterday, Fur Hat, Vodka, Communism. Russians knew a lot more about the UK. But nonetheless, there was still mistrust and fear, and many people said that relations were bad between the two countries. So our job as a cultural relations organisation was to think long-term and to build relationships, not relations, but relationships between some of the most important institutions. And so just to name a number of projects, and then I'm going to show you a video of what I think is the best one. We brought young Russian journalists from Moscow State University over to the UK, where they visited a number of UK media outlets, Sky News. They had a little session reading the news. They went down to BBC in Brighton, local radio. They visited the Independent newspaper. They learned a lot about the British press, and they went back to Moscow having had a good time and having consolidated their knowledge of the UK. And likewise, young British journalists from Westminster University went over, studying journalism, went over, and it was a real eye-opener for them going to learn about the Russian press, because what they actually got from the Russian press was that even though, of course, there is very limited freedom of expression, actually, there are nuances. It's a bit like it's a bit like different types of sand. If you live in a desert, you can spot all the different types of sand. Well, I learned living in Russia that you can actually spot the nuances in the press and spot when the press is actually being critical of the government. And so the young journalists from Westminster went over to Moscow, and they learned a lot about real Russia. They stayed in their homes and developed relationships. We also developed strong links between UK and Russian universities, and these relations and joint degree programs, and these have kept on going. And the other thing that we decided to do was to work very closely with our European partners, with our UNIC partners, the Goethe Institute and the Alliance Française. Because as you know, the Germans and the French have much better political relations with the Russians than we do. So we decided as a cultural institute, if we went in behind the Germans and the French, this would get us in the door. And it actually worked very well. Moscow State Linguistic University, the rector there, Mrs. Irina Krayeva, had been quite hostile to the British Council because she speaks German, and she's a teacher trainer in German, and she's pro-German. And if you're pro-German, you can't be pro-Britain. But we managed to get in there, in behind the Goethe Institute, and once we've been introduced, you realise that we weren't so bad after all. And we did a programme of generic language teacher training rather than just English teacher training or German teacher training. We did a generic teacher training programme. And very importantly, we included Russian language teaching. Now, what I found in Russia is that if you speak the language and if you demonstrate that you're prepared to help promote Russian language back home, as well as trying to get everyone to learn English in Russia, this works very well. And we did a number of sessions in the UK to support Russian language teaching with Ruski Mir, which is our Russian analogue. We worked closely with them on this, series of teacher training sessions. We brought together all the stakeholders in Russian language teaching in the UK, and this played extremely well back in Moscow. The project I'm most proud of is the filmmaking project that we did called Under the Skin. We brought together the National Film and Television School in London, near London, National Film and Television School, and the Moscow State Film School called VGIK, which is where Tarkovsky and all famous Russian filmmakers studied. We brought them together for a joint project where 4 young filmmakers from the UK went to Moscow, and under the tutelage of Russian professors and Russian film directors, they made films about their impressions of Moscow. They went around for 2 weeks, reconnoitering the territory, trying to work out what to make films about. And they made their films. Russian young filmmakers came over to the UK and were shown around London by the tutors at the National Film and Television School. What should we make a film about in London? What's interesting? How can we get under the skin of UK society? And they made their films. And we're going to show you some clips of these films. These films are going to be shown at the Russian Film Festival in London and at the UK Film Festival in Moscow in the next few weeks. We're just going to show you some short clips because we think these are really good examples of helping to reduce mistrust between people. And the first one is called Make Tea. This is by a Russian filmmaker in the UK.
loves orchids. It's her favourite flower. There's a few more for you there, Liz.
Bloody hell, Paddy. Thank you.
Just kept them hidden.
God, thank you, Paddy.
Happy birthday, Liz.
Thanks, Nathan. Love you. Thank you.
too.
Thank you, sweetie.
Yeah, I just met her in a pub in London, really. Just went into a pub and I was standing having a drink on my own, feeling very depressed. And there was two girls standing beside me, and I was talking to the barman, and Leslie heard me speaking, and she was interested in Irish people at the time. She always liked talking to Irish people, and she heard my accent. She just said, "Where are you from?" I just told her, and I told her my situation. Really, I was living with my brother at the time, and I wasn't getting on with my brother, so I was ready to head back to Belfast again. And she says that she had just broken up with her husband, and there's a room free to rent in our house. And I thought,
when I met Paddy many, many years ago, we were both a bit lost, really, and in a bad way, to be honest with you. I'd just been recovering from cancer, and my parents both dying at round about the same time, and was feeling very, very worried about the future and everything else. And then I met Paddy by chance, and he was in a similar situation, really. He'd just come over from Ireland, and he was suffering from very bad depression too. And I think because we've both been through a lot, and found it very difficult to talk to people about that, express it, we found we could talk to each other, and that's how our friendship began.
I didn't come to England then. I didn't want to come to England then. I saw England as the enemy country. You know, I didn't think I would be welcomed in England. Why I wanted to get away from Ireland, it wasn't just the conflict. It was everything associated with the violence. Really, it wasn't just the violence. It was all the madness of it all. Crazy. I think the violence was really affecting people in a deep way, really. And people they're not the same anymore. People change, you know. Even my family are not the same. My family have sort of closed down their emotional part of themselves. They can't really talk about emotional things. Where I was open to everything. I was able to talk about things. I wanted to talk to them in a personal way. They don't really know me. My family don't know me. They know me. They know what it was like when I was living there, but they don't know who I am as a person because they've never really tried to talk to you in that way. They talk about superficial things, but you tended to worry a lot about them as well. You know, every time they go somewhere, a bomb might go off, some shooting, and you don't know if they're going to come back alive. You know, you don't know if they've been shot or blew up in a bomb. So it was very stressful as well, but I really enjoyed my time there too with my family. I do miss that closeness with my family. Yeah, I get very emotional now and again, talking about it, because there were very emotional times, and when you have 5 brothers and 4 sisters and you're very close, and you don't feel that closeness anymore, it sort of hurts, really, And sometimes I find it difficult over here as well, it's not easy. I would like to have my family over here and be close to them again, and it's been very difficult, really, sometimes.
Okay, so that's an example of living back in Belfast. That's an example of the Russian filmmaker who's chosen the theme of migration from Northern Ireland over to London and got really inside the relationship of this man. And the film goes on, the man goes back to Belfast and visits his family again and actually talks about, we see the wall, which, of course, the wall might have come down in Berlin.
I don't know if I could see myself come back there.
Couldn't go back there. The wall has come down in Berlin, but it's still there in Belfast. And the film very poignantly shows that and explores his relationship. So that's the Russian has decided that they're going to focus on that issue of migration, family, and it's actually a very tender film. The films that were made by the young Brits in Moscow. Do you want to go? No, go to the. Yeah, no, I do want to accept questions. Yes, yeah. I just want to have 5 minutes of this, but let's do questions in the meantime. So, okay, so let's have some questions then from the floor while we're putting the other video in, because I do just want to show you the film from Moscow.
Hi, I'm Mike from the University of Exeter in the UK. I really like the presentation, the idea that the British Council has moved from... the idea that the British Council has moved from just presenting our ideas abroad and more a two-way relationship, which is a two-way thing. I think that's really good to educate future young leaders in Britain, because obviously Britain's foreign policy affects other nations, especially in the developing world. I also think it might help your problem with funding if more young leaders sort of accept the importance of cultural relations. They might be more willing to fund you. But my question is really, like, how far have you actually moved towards this two-way relationship in a practical sense? Like you mentioned the expansion of China with the Confucius Institutes. You said that you saw that as competition. Now, for me, that's more of an opportunity for British people to learn about another nation. And how far have you moved away from this idea that we just want to present our ideas and not take on other ideas? So what projects do you undertake within the UK, going around schools or universities to educate British people about foreign culture?
That's a very good point, yes. Thanks for that. We actually are focusing a lot more attention on the UK and developing the international perspective of UK youth. And a big programme that's starting at the moment is one where we're promoting multilingualism in the UK, because we do think it was a mistake on the part of the government to make language learning voluntary post-14 in the UK, and we see it as one of the roles of the British Council to challenge governments on this, but not just governments actually, but young people, because young people have voted with their feet. So you've got to have a certain amount of sympathy with the government who say, well, look, we'll teach you languages at the age of 7, and you can carry on at 14 if you want. And most people are deciding not to. So yes, I mean, we can start trying to encourage kids to learn languages and to want to learn about other cultures. Parents as well. It baffles me why young people in the UK don't want to learn languages. They can't see the benefit. There's so much evidence that language learning, apart from benefiting your mind, opens your doors to other cultures, and it's very good for your career prospects. My son is just going to university, and he wants to be a lawyer, and we went to see a couple of lawyers to say, what degree should he do? And they said, oh, don't do law, whatever you do. Do languages. The people who do languages are always really interesting people.
Hi. Hi. I'm David Weiss from Luxembourg College of Europe. I wanted to ask you, I worked as a volunteer teacher in Russia for a year, and I was also advising Russian students who were going on the Erasmus Mundus program. And what I found is that Russian authorities are not always that keen on cultural exchanges because they're very scared of one thing, and that's brain drain. And in the 90s and even now, I find that both Americans and Europeans use cultural relations as well to get bright young Russians out of Russia. And I mean, if you know Russia, I can understand that they want to leave Russia at the moment, but how is there a future for a country like Russia, or for any country in their situation, if you get out their brightest people, even if it is under the, if you say it's cultural relations?
I mean, that's a very good point. And one of the accusations that the Russian government levelled at us was that we were contributing to the brain drain through our Chevening Scholarship Programme. But actually, we did point out to them that our Chevening Scholarship Programme, which is master's degrees fully paid by the British government, that the condition on which we accepted Russians to the UK to do Chevening was that they returned to Russia so that they fed back their expertise into the local community. The thing is, at the end of the day, if people want to leave, there's nothing we can do to stop them. And actually, it's up to the Russians to make their own society and education system and create suitable jobs which encourage people to stay. I think that if they didn't go to the UK, they'd go to the States or wherever. So it is a difficult one, I agree. But certainly that was our policy, was we only gave scholarships to people who were going back.
Hello, I come from China, Guangzhou. Once I got a chance to have an internship offered by the General Council of the British in Guangzhou, and once the General Counselor showed me to the Visa Center, British Visa Center and the German Visa Center, she's quite proud of the situation. There's a contrasting comparison between the two Visa Center. One is crowned of people, that is your Visa Center, and there's few people in the German Visa Center. But actually, it is obvious that British is very, very successful by attracting the foreign students in China to study in British, and lots of Chinese students would like to go to Britain to study. But do you feel that if the number of the foreign students attracted by the universities in Britain, the larger the number is, the quality will be affected or not?
Well, I don't think the quality will be affected because the students that we accept into the UK are always very high quality. So they enrich the experience for everybody else. So that's my view on it. The international students are a very welcome addition, and we need to maximise their skills and experience.
Hi, my name is Indra Adnan, and I'm the founder of something called the Soft Power Network. I've really enjoyed your presentation. I loved everything that you said in terms of the ideals and the values and what you're trying to achieve. My job or my interest is really how to popularize all of that thinking. And my question is, well, there's two. I've got a lot of questions, actually. But let's start with, if you continue to be called the British Council, how do you get your message across? I mean, I don't know anyone in my own daily life who understands what the British Council is really doing, because they hear British Council and that's it. They think it's about the Council of Britain abroad. And so they don't understand. That's number one question. And the second question is, my understanding of soft power is quite different from, I think, the governmental or international relations understanding of soft power. I think it has a lot more life in it than the British Council has decided. I don't think it should just stay up there with public diplomacy as a one-way kind of vehicle. I think it has a potential to be much, much more, particularly in the eyes of the general public, who perceive a real alternative, hard power, soft power, right? We understand what hard power is. What could soft power be? There seems to be a huge area of possibility there for people in terms of popular understanding. And it seems to have been dismissed by the British Council to some extent as something that governments do still at that far end. I would put it much further along the continuum towards exchange and relationship, and to do with us developing our own ability to be the change we wish to see in the world, etc., etc. I think there's so much more possibility around those words.
Well, I agree with you. I don't think we're dismissing soft power. I mean, I think it has got a huge potential, as you say. So I wouldn't disagree with anything you say. On the name, the British Council is a terrible name. You're absolutely right. And what's interesting is how many organisations with British in their name have decided to change it in order to sort of have more impact and become more independent and global. And there's some classic examples like the BBC, British Broadcasting Corporation. Well, nobody calls it the British Broadcasting Corporation anymore. And there must have been a meeting. It must have been great to be a fly on the wall at that meeting when some bright spark said, hey, if we want to be the global independent broadcaster, we can't call ourselves the British Broadcasting Corporation. Let's call ourselves the BBC. And at that time, he was probably sacked. But then 10 years later, they said, oh, that wasn't a bad idea by that bloke 10 years ago. And another example is BP. Does anybody know what BP stands for? You're wrong, you see. You need to read your advertising hoardings. They're now branding themselves as Beyond Petroleum. Very clever. And, British Airways, when they decided to go from being the world's favourite airline to the world's favourite airline, they changed themselves to BA. Everyone said, I'm flying BA. You know, I'm flying British Airways, BA. The one thing they forgot to do, though, when they did all those lovely ethnic tailplanes, was to teach their staff, cabin crew, to speak foreign languages. So it's a classic example of having a vision and a branding, but not actually following it up with culture.
I also liked your presentation a lot, and especially the pragmatic ring that it had to it. That's why I would like to ask the following question that has really sort of intrigued me for years. Meetings like this one are extremely important and extremely enriching. The problem that I see is this, what I would label preaching to the choir. People are not likely to be Israel haters if they come here to listen to our Israeli colleagues. Germans going to Auschwitz, chances are sort of young, moved, history-oriented people, but it's not the far-right sort of numpheads that go to Auschwitz, and they probably need it the most. How can you tackle this? I mean, obviously you can't sort of force people by police to show up in your Moscow meetings, but how can you enlarge the circle to those that probably need it the most, or would be most susceptible to having their minds changed?
That's a really, really good point, and it's one that we've not found the answer to. I think we'd be happy to get if we could get the floating voters in the middle to come, the agnostics, that would actually be very, very rewarding. So first, I think we need to go for them, and then perhaps try to aim for the people that really need their minds changed. It's a really good point. Yeah. Yes.
Hello, Mr. Hope. Thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Hui. I'm from Singapore. I think it's wonderful that you're encouraging lots of opportunities for exchange in the arts and culture and so forth, but I was thinking that with the arts, you can encourage lots of opportunities, but you can't direct how the art goes, and there's a lot of potential for art to take a very negative turn or a very destructive turn, and I was just wondering if there are things that you do to encourage the work to continue to move in kind of a constructive, creative direction to keep the atmosphere kind of light and positive. I'm just curious if you've had to deal with problems of there being, conflict or negative interactions or destructive anger, art, instead of, necessarily always positive, creative thing.
Well, actually, we prefer to show the bleak stuff. British film festivals tend to be full of Ken Loach films and Mike Leigh films, after which the only sensible course of action is to go and commit suicide. But they tend to generate quite a bit of debate, and they bring out the issues. we tried to get a balance between the feel-good films and the bleaker ones, but actually the feel-good ones don't really change anything, and they don't make much of an impact on people. It's sometimes difficult to find a feel-good British film, though, because we do tend to want to make films about the underbelly of British society.
Well, I think this was a very inspiring Sunday morning, and I thank you very much for that really excellent presentation and also the illustration of what we got here. Thank you also for your excellent questions. And now Pete has an announcement to make. First of all,